I can't do it. She is pregnant and it's mine. This is disappointing.
The room went so still that the only sound was the city outside the window. 41 floors up in the glass and steel tower that housed the Choi Group's legitimate headquarters on the Atlanta Midtown skyline, Jong-soo Choi sat behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars and looked at the man he had trusted with every irreversible thing for the past 9 years. He looked at him with the specific, compressed quality of a man whose primary register was control and who was now, for the first time in a very long time, encountering something he had not scheduled and could not immediately contain. Rail Yun had walked into this office at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening and said 4 sentences. 4 sentences that had, in the time it took to say them, reorganized the operational reality of the past 6 weeks and the personal reality of the past 4 months and the structural reality of the next several decades simultaneously. "I can't do it," Rail had said. "She's pregnant." A pause. The specific, weighted pause of a man who understood what the next sentence would cost and had decided the cost was the price. "It's mine." The city moved outside the window. Atlanta on a Thursday night. Ordinary, beautiful, indifferent to the specific, detonating quality of the silence inside the 41st floor of the Choi Group Tower. Jong-soo Choi did not move for a long time. His hands were flat on the desk. His face was the managed version, the specific, professional containment of a man who ran one of the most significant Korean organized operations in the American Southeast, and who had maintained that position for 16 years by being the person in every room who was last to react and first to understand. But something was happening underneath the containment. Something that Rail Yun, who had been in more dangerous rooms than most people would enter in a lifetime, and who had been reading Jong-soo Choi's specific varieties of stillness for 9 years, recognized as the most dangerous version. Not the cold fury version, the recalculation version, the kind that produced, when it was finished, a decision that could not be appealed. So Rail stood in front of the desk and did not look away, because he had spent 4 months building something he had not intended to build, and 6 weeks receiving an assignment he had not been able to complete, and 11 minutes in a parking garage 2 blocks from Lisa White's apartment understanding, with the specific, clarifying certainty of a man who has arrived at a moment his entire life has been moving toward without his knowing it, that there was exactly one person whose safety was worth every other cost available, and that person was carrying his child. But there was a second thing, a thing that Rail Yun had discovered in the 6 weeks since the assignment that Jong-soo did not know he had discovered. A thing that was not about Lisa White's pregnancy or Rail's refusal or the specific, compressed fury currently organizing itself behind Jong-soo Choi's managed expression. A thing that changed the shape of everything. My name is not relevant. What is relevant is that this story has been verified by 3 people who were present for its events and by the documentation that exists in a specific, sealed file in the offices of a federal court in the Northern District of Georgia. What follows is accurate. What follows is the account of the 6 weeks that began with an order and ended with 4 sentences and produced, in the space between, the most consequential decision that either of the men in that room had ever made. Subscribe before this story moves a single word forward, because what Jong-soo Choi says after the silence, and what Rail Yun does the moment he says it, is the detonation that this entire story has been building toward. And the twist underneath it is something neither of them saw coming. You need to already be here. Lisa White had not gone looking for trouble. This is the thing that requires establishing before the 6 weeks, before the 4 months, before the Thursday evening that produced 4 sentences and a silence that reorganized everything. Lisa White was not a woman who went looking for anything she hadn't been hired to find. She was, in the vocabulary of her profession, the specific, methodical kind of person who arrived at the thing she was hired to find through the patient, architectural accumulation of correct small moves rather than through the dramatic, single-point revelation that produced spectacle without the substance to hold it. She was 30 years old. She had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, the daughter of Winifred and Samuel White, a registered nurse and a retired MARTA transit supervisor who had raised their 2 daughters in the specific, practical, loving way of parents who understood that the world's opportunities were available to their children and also understood that the availability did not mean the receiving was automatic. Lisa had studied accounting at Clark Atlanta, had gotten her CPA at 24, and had spent the 6 years since building a forensic accounting consultancy that operated under the name White Clarity Solutions and that specialized in the specific, painstaking discipline of finding the money that organizations had arranged not to be found. She was very good at finding money. This was not a skill that produced universal affection. The money that was arranged not to be found was arranged that way by people who had resources and motivation to maintain the arrangement, and the appearance of a forensic accountant in the organizational picture was, for those people, the specific category of event that required a response. Lisa understood this. She had built White Clarity Solutions with the specific, professional awareness of a woman who understood that her work existed in a space where the stakes were occasionally higher than the invoice. But she had safeguards. She had protocols. She had a colleague named Dessa Moreau, meticulous, sharp, with the contained, watchful quality of someone who had spent 8 years in financial compliance and had developed the specific, calibrated paranoia of a person who understood that the absence of visible threat was not the same as safety. So when the assignment came to White Clarity Solutions 6 months ago, routed through a corporate intermediary, listed as a governance audit for a mid-sized commercial development fund with Southeast Holdings, Lisa had processed it the way she processed everything. She had checked the intermediary. She had reviewed the fund's public documentation. She had confirmed the engagement through the standard verification channels. She had found nothing that indicated the assignment was anything other than what it presented as. But the assignment was not what it presented as. The fund was real and the development holdings were real. But the entity that had actually commissioned the audit was not the corporate intermediary. It was the Choi Council, the senior governing body of the Choi organization's multi-generational operational structure, the 7 members who held the original organizational charter that Jong-soo Choi's grandfather had built and that had been maintained, through succession, as the structural check on the organization's executive principle. The council had a problem. The problem was called Jong-soo Choi. But Lisa White did not know any of this. She knew the fund. She knew the numbers. And she was 6 weeks into the audit when she found the first layer of what the numbers were actually saying. She had found the money. The specific, precisely arranged, architecturally hidden money of a man who had been systematically removing funds from the Choi organization's operational accounts into a secondary structure that did not appear on any document the council had access to. She had found $17 million that had been made to not exist. She had documented it with the methodical, patient, irrefutable precision that was her professional signature. So she had the evidence. And the evidence was what made her dangerous. Not to the council, to Jong-soo Choi, who had not known about the council's engagement of White Clarity Solutions, who had discovered its existence 6 weeks into the audit through the specific, comprehensive intelligence apparatus of a man who monitored his organizational environment with the focused, professional paranoia of someone who had 16 years of enemies and counting. He had discovered the audit. He had discovered Lisa White. And he had given an assignment to the best person he had for assignments of this specific, final category. His name was Raelyun. And what happened between Raelyun and Lisa White in the 6 weeks that followed is the story of the Thursday evening and the forced sentences and the silence that reorganized everything. Jong-soo Choi gave the assignment on a Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Not in the tower, in the private room of a restaurant in Koreatown that was one of 3 locations he used for conversations that did not belong in any building with cameras in the lobby. The room was small, warm, with the specific quality of a space that had been made private not through design, but through the long establishment of a habit. The restaurant's owner had been providing this room for Jong-soo's conversations for 11 years and understood, without ever being told explicitly, that the conversations were not for recording and not for repeating. Raelyun arrived at 6:58. He was always 2 minutes early for Jong-soo's meetings, which was the specific, professional courtesy of a man who understood that arriving at the precise time requested communicated compliance, while arriving 2 minutes before it communicated something slightly different. Jong-soo had noticed this years ago and had said nothing, which was itself a form of approval. He was 35 years old, Korean-American, built with the specific, functional quality of someone whose body had been maintained as a professional instrument for 15 years. Not theatrical. The kind of physical presence that was most apparent in its absolute, contained stillness, in the economy of movement that communicated that everything available was being held in reserve until it was needed. He had a scar along his left jaw from an incident 7 years ago that he had never discussed with anyone, including Jong-soo, which Jong-soo respected because the management of the unshared past was a form of discipline he recognized. Rail had been with the Choi organization since he was 26. He had come from a background that the operational vocabulary described as military adjacent, a specific, careful description that contained significant truth and said nothing about the specific context that had produced the skill set, which was itself the kind of thing that the organization's best people carried without annotating. He was Jong-soo's primary enforcer, not in the theatrical sense, in the specific, functional sense of the person who handled the situations that required the most precise, reliable, professional management, and that could not accommodate error. He had handled 11 such situations in 9 years. He had handled all 11 correctly. So when Jong-soo told him about Lisa White, Rail listened with the focused, complete attention he brought to assignments. He did not react to the name. He did not react to the category of the assignment. He filed the information with the methodical, professional precision of someone building the operational picture that the assignment required. But there was a detail in Jong-soo's briefing that did not arrive with the specific, flat accuracy of the other details. It arrived with the specific quality of something being managed in the telling, not a lie, but the version of the truth that produced the operational outcome Jong-soo needed. Jong-soo told Rail that Lisa White was a forensic accountant who had been engaged by a competitor organization to build a case against the Choi Group's financial structure. He told him she had documentation of fund movements that, if delivered to the competitor, would compromise the organization's operational security. He told him the documentation needed to be recovered and the threat needed to be neutralized. He did not tell Rail about the council. He did not tell him that the commissioning entity was internal rather than external. He did not tell Rail that the documentation Lisa White had built was not a competitive threat, but a governance threat, that the $17 million she had found was not the organization's exposure to a rival, but Jong-soo's personal embezzlement from the organization itself. So Rail received the assignment as it was given. He verified the target information with the professional thoroughness he brought to every assignment. He confirmed Lisa White's address, her routine, her work patterns, her professional and personal contacts. But something in the preliminary surveillance produced the first deviation from the standard operational pattern. Lisa White was not acting like a person in contact with a rival organization. She was acting like a person who was finishing a job, who was in the final stages of a professional deliverable, working long hours, cross-referencing documents, building the kind of comprehensive, documented account that a forensic accountant builds when they are preparing to submit. Her behavior was not the behavior of an intelligence asset. It was the behavior of a consultant who had found something significant and was preparing to present it. Rail noted this deviation. He filed it in the category of things requiring continued observation before the assignment moved to its operational phase. But the continued observation required proximity. So he established a cover. Not an elaborate one. The specific, functional kind that his experience had taught him was more durable than the elaborate kind, because elaborate covers had too many elements to maintain and functional ones had the single, essential element of being plausible to someone who was not looking for deception. He rented the apartment directly above Lisa White's in the building she occupied in Edgewood. He used a name he had used before, Run, and presented, in the building's ambient social geography, as a commercial photography consultant. He had been in the apartment for 4 days when he encountered Lisa White in the building's elevator. She was carrying a box of files. The box was large enough that her view was partially obscured over the top of it, and she stepped into the elevator with the focused, slightly awkward attention of someone managing a physical object that was at the limit of its convenient handling. She looked up when the doors closed and found him already inside. "Sorry," she said. The reflex apology of someone whose box had shifted toward the other occupant. "It's fine," he said. She adjusted the box. She looked at the floor numbers. She had the specific, present quality of someone who was thinking about something and was in the elevator as a transitional state between two parts of the thinking. He looked at her. Not the surveillance version, the version that arrives before the professional version can organize itself, the version that is simply a man looking at a woman and receiving what is actually there rather than what the operational briefing described. But he organized the professional version before the doors opened. He managed the moment with the disciplined, practiced attention of someone who has had 15 years of practice at managing moments. So he got out on the 4th floor, and she continued to the 6th, and the elevator closed behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went to his apartment and opened the operational file and looked at the preliminary timeline. He had time. The assignment did not have a hard deadline yet. Jiangsu had given him a window rather than a date. There was operational space for the continued observation he had already decided was necessary. He told himself the decision was professional, that the deviation in her behavior warranted a more complete picture before the assignment moved forward. He was not, at that point, lying to himself. The professional assessment was genuine, but it was also not the complete account of why he stood in the corridor for a moment before going back to the file. And that, the incomplete account, was the beginning of everything. The building had a laundry room on the 2nd floor. Rail had noted this in the building's preliminary survey, filed it under ambient social geography, and thought nothing of it until the 2nd Tuesday of his occupancy, when he arrived at the laundry room at 7 a.m., his standard window for the task, early enough to avoid the building's social hours, and found Lisa White already there, sitting on the folding table with a mug of coffee and a document spread across her lap, reading with the specific, absorbed focus of a woman who had decided that the laundry cycle time was 43 minutes of usable work time and was using it accordingly. She looked up when he came in. She did not perform the social ease of a building neighbor encountering another building neighbor. She looked at him with the specific, direct assessment of someone who reads the room accurately and then makes a decision about it. "Run," she said, the name he had given when they met in the elevator. "Lisa," he said, because her name was in the file, and because not knowing it would have been the kind of conspicuous not knowing that produced its own questions. "You remember names," she said. "Professional habit," he said. She accepted this. She looked back at the document. He loaded the machine with the calm, methodical efficiency of someone who is not performing a task, but simply doing it, and sat in the chair against the opposite wall with the newspaper he had brought for exactly this kind of transitional time. So they were in the laundry room for 37 minutes. They did not talk continuously. They talked in the specific, comfortable intervals of two people who have independently decided that the other person's presence in the room is not an intrusion and that silence between them does not require filling. He discovered, in those 37 minutes, that she was funny, not performatively, in the dry, economical way of someone who finds the world genuinely absurd and says so in the occasional, precisely chosen sentence that lands exactly right. She said one thing about the building's laundry machine spin cycle that was so accurate and so unexpected that he found himself producing a genuine response. Not the managed version, the real one, before he had organized the professional version to intercept it. She noticed. She did not make anything of it. But she noticed. This was the first of 11 laundry room encounters over 4 months, which were not arranged, which is the important fact about all 11 of them, that neither party arranged them because neither party could afford to appear to be arranging them, which meant that each encounter arrived with the specific, unplanned quality of something that was not being managed and that was therefore entirely real. But the laundry room was not the whole of it. There were other encounters, the building's lobby, the elevator, the coffee shop 1 block east that they both used in the specific, independent pattern of two people who had independently found the same correct solution to the same need. There were the 2 evenings when they had both been in the lobby at the same time and had stood in the building's small outdoor courtyard and talked in the full, present way of two people who had, somewhere in the 11 laundry encounters, in the lobby and the elevator, crossed from the category of building neighbors into the category of something that didn't have a convenient label but was considerably more substantial. He had not planned any of it. This was the specific, particular quality of the 4 months that had no operational explanation and that he had examined from every available professional angle and found to be genuine. He had not cultivated the proximity for the assignment. He had been cultivating the proximity for the assignment, and then the proximity had become something else, and the something else had no operational vocabulary because it was not operational. She trusted him, not in the specific, managed way of a person who has decided to trust as a social strategy, but in the specific, foundational way of someone who has encountered another person whose consistency has accumulated to the level where trust is not a decision but an observation. She trusted him because he was, in every encounter, exactly what the previous encounter had established, no more, no less, no performance of something that the substance did not support. He had never trusted anyone that precisely. The professional register did not accommodate it. But in the laundry room, in the lobby, and the courtyard conversations, he had been the version of himself that existed before 15 years of professional formation had overlaid it, and she had received that version with the full, warm, attentive precision of someone who knew what they were looking at. So they had 4 months. Not formally, not the named, structured, announced kind of relationship that required a conversation about what it was. The specific, organic kind that is built of 100 accumulated real moments, and that is, by the time it is visible as a category, already far more substantial than anything that could have been built by intention. But Rail had not told her anything true about himself, and she had not told him that the document on her lap in the laundry room was the beginning of an audit that Jong-Soo Choi had assigned him to neutralize. So 2 people who were, in every available personal sense, entirely honest with each other were simultaneously, in every available professional sense, the most dangerous things in each other's lives. And neither of them knew the full picture. For months of laundry room, Tuesday mornings, and lobby conversations that neither of them arranged. Subscribe, because what Lisa White had on her lap that first morning, and what Rail Yoon still doesn't know she knows about him, is the information that makes this story's twist hit harder than anything you're currently expecting. The call from Jong-Soo came on a Monday morning 6 weeks into the occupancy. 6 weeks in, which was 2 months into what had already begun to accumulate between them, which meant that when Jong-Soo's voice arrived on Rail's phone with the specific, operational quality of a man who had been patient long enough and was moving the assignment to its active phase, Rail was already in a position that the professional vocabulary did not have adequate language for. Jong-Soo had a timeline. The deliverable, Lisa White's audit document, was, according to his intelligence, close to completion. The window for neutralizing the threat before the document was submitted was narrowing. He needed the assignment advanced. So Rail said he was ready. He said it in the flat, operational register of the professional version of himself, the one that had handled 11 assignments and had not, in any of those 11, produced a deviation from the correct operational outcome. He said it, and ended the call, and sat in his apartment on the 4th floor of the building where Lisa White was on the 6th floor finishing a document he was supposed to prevent from being submitted, and he did not move for 6 minutes. 6 minutes was unusual for Rail Yoon. He had been trained, and had trained himself, in the 15 years since the training, to move from decision to action with the minimal possible interval, because the interval between decision and action was where doubt lived, and doubt was the most operationally expensive thing available. But something had changed in the 6 minutes. Not in the operational calculation. The calculation was the same, the parameters were the same, the assignment was the same. What had changed was the specific quality of who was on the other side of the assignment, which was not supposed to change anything and had, in 11 previous instances, changed nothing. But this was not the 11th instance. This was the 12th. So he went to her apartment. Not for the assignment. He told himself this with the professional clarity he had maintained for 11 previous situations. He went to her apartment because she had mentioned, 2 days ago in the courtyard, that the coffee shop's espresso machine had been producing an inconsistency in the shot extraction that was ruining the morning. And he had said he would make her coffee the next time the coffee shop failed her, and the coffee shop had, according to the text she had sent him at 7 a.m., failed her again this morning. He brought coffee. He stood at her door. She opened it with the specific, warm, unguarded quality of someone who expected what they were getting and was genuinely pleased to receive it. He came inside. The apartment was the specific, organized version of a workspace that has been taken over by a project, documents stacked with methodical care, a whiteboard on the standing easel near the window covered in the dense, interconnected notation of a forensic accountant building a case from the component evidence. A laptop at the center of the dining table with 3 external monitors in the specific, efficient configuration of someone who had outgrown a single screen. He noted all of it. He noted it with the operational precision of someone who had been trained to read environments for information. But he also noted it as Ron, as the man she knew, who would see his friend's apartment taken over by her work and find it recognizable and endearing rather than operationally significant. She poured the coffee into the mug she had already ready. She looked at the whiteboard with the rueful, slightly exhausted quality of someone who is 3 days from the end of a significant project and who can feel both the proximity of completion and the specific, grinding weight of those last 3 days. Almost done, he said. Almost, she said. One more verification layer, and the document is complete. She looked at the whiteboard. Then it goes to the client, and I sleep for 48 hours. The client is expecting it, he said. Expecting it, and very ready for it, she said. I think they've been waiting longer than they expected. I had to go back to a secondary document layer that took longer than the estimate. She looked at her coffee. Worth it. The secondary layer is the part that makes it irrefutable. He held his mug. He looked at the whiteboard. He looked at Lisa White, who was standing in her apartment 3 days from completing a document he had been assigned to prevent, telling him about the irrefutability of its secondary layer with the specific, professional pride of a woman who had done difficult work correctly and knew it. But something was wrong. Not wrong in the way that deviated from the assignment. Wrong in the way that deviated from Jiangsu's briefing. The specific, careful thing he had noticed in the preliminary surveillance was present again, at a closer resolution. Lisa White was not building a case for delivery to a rival organization. The direction of the evidence was wrong for that. The secondary document layer she was describing, the one that made the document irrefutable, was not the kind of layer a competitive intelligence operation would need. It was the kind of layer a governance body would need. The document was not going to a competitor. It was going somewhere internal to the Choi organization. Rail processed this with the flat, methodical attention of a man who has just received a piece of information that reorganizes the operational picture without changing the assignment. He processed it and set it in the specific, sealed category of information requiring further verification before it affected any decision. So he drank his coffee. He talked with Lisa about the whiteboard and the secondary layer and the 48 hours of sleep she was planning. He stayed for an hour in the specific, ordinary, warm way of a man visiting a person whose company he valued. And when he left, he did not go back to his apartment. He went to his car, and he drove to the Koreatown Library where the organization's secondary records were stored in a third-floor archive that had been used for document management since the original organization's founding. He needed to see the original commissioning document for the Lisa White audit. Because if the document was going internal, if the client was inside the Choi structure rather than outside it, then the assignment Jiangsu had given him was not the assignment Jiangsu had described. And the difference between those two things was the most dangerous kind of difference available. The archive took him 3 hours. Raelyun was not a man who processed paper slowly. He had been reading organizational documentation since he was 23, when his introduction to the Choi structure had begun in the specific, unglamorous way that all real organizational apprenticeships begin, not with the visible work, but with the foundational work. The documentation and the cross-referencing and the building of the comprehensive picture that the foundational work produces in a person who pays the full attention it requires. So he found what he was looking for in 3 hours, which was considerably faster than it should have been possible, and which was a function of his specific, comprehensive understanding of where the Choi organization's documents lived and how they were categorized, and where the gaps in the categorization indicated that something had been put somewhere other than where it belonged. The gap was in the council files. The Choi Council, The 7-member senior governing body that held the original organizational charter maintained a separate documentation stream from the executive principal's operational files. They always had. This was a structural feature of the original charter that had been maintained through 3 generations of Choi succession, specifically because the founders had understood that the most dangerous organizational failure was the failure of oversight. The council's documentation was supposed to be inaccessible to the executive principal. It was stored in a separate archive section maintained by a council secretary whose position was accountable to the council rather than to Jong-soo. But the gap Rail had found was in the cross-reference index, a document that recorded the commissioning of external consultants for council-directed work. And in the cross-reference index, under a corporate intermediary name that he recognized from the preliminary surveillance of Lisa White, was a commissioning entry that had been marked with the specific notation the council used for governance audit work. Lisa White had been commissioned by the council, not by a rival organization, not by an external competitor, by the Choi organization's own senior governing body, to audit a specific fund that fell under the council's oversight jurisdiction. Rail sat with this for a full minute. 60 seconds of the kind of stillness that is not the professional stillness but the anterior version, the stillness of someone whose entire operational picture has just been reorganized by a single document and who is in the process of constructing the correct new picture before moving from the stillness. The new picture was this. Lisa White's audit had found something in the fund, something significant enough that the council had been waiting, with the specific, patient urgency of people who understood that the documentation needed to be irrefutable for the completed deliverable. And Jong-soo Choi had found out about the audit and had given Rail the assignment without telling him the commissioning source, which meant Jong-soo had known the audit was council-directed and had described it as a competitor threat specifically to produce an assignment that Rail would accept and execute without the full picture. But what had Lisa found? What was in the fund that the council needed documented and Jong-soo needed buried? He went deeper into the archive. He found the fund's management records. He found the transaction logs. He found, in the 4th hour of the archive, the specific, irrefutable architecture of $17 million that had been systematically removed from the organization's operational accounts into a secondary structure that did not appear on any document the council had access to. He found Jong-soo's embezzlement. So he sat in the archive room with the documents in front of him and the specific, clarifying quality of a complete picture arriving all at once. Jong-soo had been stealing from the organization. The council had suspected and had engaged a forensic accountant to build the documentation. Lisa White had built it to the standard of irrefutability that she had described in her apartment, with the secondary layer that made it complete. And Jong-soo, who had discovered the audit's existence, had assigned his best enforcer to eliminate the one person who could deliver the documented proof of his theft to the people who had the charter authority to remove him. But here was the thing that lived underneath all of that. The thing that was not in the archive documents, but that Rail assembled from the complete picture with the professional precision of a man who had spent 9 years in this organization and who understood its power structures at the level of architecture rather than surface. If Lisa White's document was delivered to the council, Jong-soo Choi's position as executive principal was finished. The charter was explicit on the consequences of embezzlement from the organizational accounts, removal from principal authority, forfeiture of organizational assets, and the specific, organizational consequences that the charter did not describe in explicit language because the founders had understood that the council would know what those consequences were. But if Lisa White did not deliver the document, if the assignment was completed, then the council would eventually discover the embezzlement through other means, because the council always did, and they would also discover that their commissioned auditor had been eliminated by the executive principal, which would accelerate the consequences considerably. Either way, Jong-soo's position was already finished. He was operating on a timeline he had not fully calculated. And Rail Yoon, who had been in the organization for 9 years and who had, in the service of that organization, handled 11 assignments at Jong-soo's direction, was now looking at the complete picture of a man who had used him as the instrument of covering up a theft from the organization they both served. He had been used, not for the organization, for Jiangsu's personal protection. So he sat in the archive for another full minute. And then he made a decision. Not the operational decision about the assignment, the larger decision. The one that required the complete picture rather than the briefing version, and that the archive had now made possible. He drove back to the building. He drove with the specific, focused clarity of a man who has resolved a significant calculation and is now in the clean, certain space after the resolution. But he did not know what was waiting for him at the building. $17 million. The council commissioned the audit. Jiangsu used Rail to cover his own theft. Subscribe, because what Rail finds when he gets back to the building is the piece of the picture that changes every decision he's about to make. And it's not the piece any of you are expecting. The pregnancy test was on the counter of Lisa's kitchen. Rail did not see it immediately. He arrived at the building and went to his apartment first, not Lisa's, his own, to change out of the archive air and to give himself the specific, disciplined interval of managed transition that he used between the professional version of himself and whatever else was operating this evening. But he heard her through the ceiling. Not clearly. The building's construction was solid enough to contain most sounds. But the specific, particular quality of a woman's movement that communicated, in the specific, body-reading way that his training had developed to an involuntary precision, something that was not the routine quality of her usual evenings. So he went to her door. He knocked with the specific, ordinary knock of Rin the neighbor. She opened the door after a moment that was slightly longer than usual. She was standing in the way of someone who has been sitting down and has organized themselves to stand without fully completing the organization. She looked at him with the specific, full attention quality she always brought to his presence. But there was something underneath it that was not the usual version. Something that was still in the processing phase. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" She looked at him for a moment. The specific, deciding quality look of someone who has a piece of information that they are weighing the sharing of in real time. "Come in," she said. He came in. The apartment was in the same state as the morning. The document work still deployed across the dining table, the whiteboard still covered. But Lisa had not been at the table. She had been at the kitchen counter, which was where the test was sitting with the specific, matter-of-fact presence of an object that has been set down and not yet decided what to do about. He saw it. He processed it with the professional precision that was his consistent mode, and that, in this specific moment, was the most inadequate tool available because what he was looking at was not a professional situation. She watched him see it. She did not speak. She gave the moment the space it required, which was the specific quality she brought to most important things. He looked at her. "How long?" he said. She stopped. "Reorganized. This morning. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." He was very still. Not the professional stillness. The interior version. The version that arrived before everything else could organize itself. "How far?" he said. 8 weeks, she said. "Maybe 9. I have to. I need to see someone. I haven't yet." She looked at the test. "I've been at the whiteboard all day trying to finish the document, and I kept coming back to this, and I couldn't." She stopped again. "I don't know what you're going to say." What Raelyun said, in the specific, flat, accurate register of a man who has arrived at the most important sentence of his adult life before he was ready for it, and who is saying it anyway because the readiness was not the requirement. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him. The full, complete, unmanaged version of her attention that he had been receiving for 4 months, and that had not, in any of those 4 months, become anything other than the most clarifying thing he had ever been on the receiving end of. "You don't have to say that," she said. "I'm not saying it because I have to," he said. So they stood in the kitchen for a long time. In the specific, weighted quiet of 2 people who are standing in a new version of everything and are taking the appropriate amount of time to understand that the new version is what it is, and that the understanding is what comes next. But Rail was in 2 places simultaneously. He was standing in Lisa White's kitchen as Ron, the photography consultant on the 4th floor, the man she trusted and who was not going anywhere. And he was standing in the complete picture from the archive, the forensic accountant, the council's commissioned auditor, the person he had been assigned to neutralize and whose document was 3 days from completion on the dining table and whose pregnancy was 8 weeks old. He had to tell her. He understood this with the complete, unavoidable clarity of a man who has decided that the person he is standing next to deserves the full truth, and that the full truth is the most dangerous thing he has ever been in possession of, and that the danger was not a reason not to give it. But not tonight. He made this decision in the specific, professional way of someone who understands that timing is architecture, and that the correct moment for the most important conversation has a specific, identifiable quality that tonight did not have. Tonight had a different quality. Tonight had the quality of a test on a kitchen counter and a woman who had been trying to figure out how to tell him all day. And the thing tonight required was not the full truth, but the first true thing, which was that he was not going anywhere. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make dinner." She looked at him with the specific, evaluating precision of a woman who reads what is actually happening in a room and not the surface of it. She had been doing this for 4 months, and she had been right about the surface consistently. But there was something in his face tonight that she was reading as a deeper layer than the surface, and she was filing it with the patient, accumulating precision of someone who understood that the complete picture took longer than a single evening to assemble. "Okay," she said. She sat down. He made dinner. He made it with the focused, deliberate attention of a man who was doing the most ordinary thing available and finding it the most grounding thing he had ever done. And he knew, by the time the food was on the table, what he was going to do. Not the assignment. The other thing. The thing that required walking into Jong-soo Choi's office and saying 4 sentences. He went to the tower on Thursday evening. Not because he had run out of time. Jong-soo had not set a final deadline, and the assignment's window, while narrowing, had not closed. He went because he had spent the days between the kitchen and the Thursday evening in the specific, complete, architectural process of a man who is dismantling a version of himself that he has been occupying for 15 years and building the next version from the correct materials. He had told Lisa 2 things on the Wednesday evening. He had not told her everything. Not yet. Not in the sequence that would produce the correct understanding rather than the catastrophic one. But he had told her 2 things that were the beginning of the full truth delivered in the order it could be received. He had told her his name was not Run. He had said it simply, in the flat, accurate register of someone who has decided that the first true thing requires the correct vocabulary. He told her his name was Rail. He told her that the rest required a longer conversation, and that the longer conversation required that he do one thing first. She had looked at him. The full, complete, evaluating version. She had said, "How dangerous is the one thing?" "For me," he said, "considerable." "And for me," she said. He looked at her. "You've been in danger since before you knew my name," he said. "The one thing is what changes that." She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "Rail." Testing the name. Receiving it. "Go do the one thing." So Thursday evening. The tower. 41 floors. He had called ahead, not to arrange the meeting, but to ensure Jong-soo was in the building, which was the specific, professional courtesy of a man who wanted the conversation to happen in the correct location with no alternative venue available. The assistant, a composed, efficient man named Sajin who had been managing Jong-soo's schedule for 6 years, confirmed that Mr. Choi was in and that Rail was expected. He was not expecting this conversation, but he was always expected in the building. He arrived at 11:43 p.m. He took the private elevator to the 41st floor. He walked the corridor with the specific, contained quality of someone who has made a decision and is moving toward its execution with the full, steady attention that the execution requires. Jong-soo was at the desk. He looked up when Rail came in. He read Rail's entry, the quality of the walk, the quality of the face, with the practiced accuracy of a man who had been reading Rail Yoon's entries into rooms for 9 years and who understood the specific varieties of what those entries communicated. This entry was a variety he had not seen before. "Rail," he said. Rail stood in front of the desk. He looked at Jong-soo Choi with the full, direct, complete attention of a man who had something to say and was going to say it in the specific, precise, irrevocable order of someone who had prepared the sentence carefully and was now delivering it. "I can't do it," he said. The room was still. "She's pregnant," he said. The stillness had a different quality. "It's mine," he said. The city outside the window continued its ordinary business. Atlanta at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening. Indifferent, beautiful, entirely unaware that the silence on the 41st floor of the Choi Group Tower had the specific, structural quality of something that was not going to resolve itself in the direction that one of the two men in the room expected. Jong-soo Choi looked at his best enforcer for a very long time. The managed version. The recalculation version. The one that was not the cold fury but the thing underneath it that produced, when it was finished, the decisions that could not be appealed. Sit down, Jong-soo said. Rail did not sit. I'm not finished, he said. Jong-soo looked at him. The assignment is compromised, Rail said. Not by the pregnancy. By the picture. He held Jong-soo's gaze. I've seen the archive. I know who commissioned the audit. I know what Lisa White found. He paused. The deliberate, patient pause of a man who has prepared the next sentence with the full care it deserves. I know about 17 million. The room went to a different quality. Not the recalculation version. The specific, anterior version. The version that arrives when a man who has controlled every room he has occupied for 16 years encounters the one piece of information that removes the control from the room entirely. Jong-soo looked at Rail-yoon. At the man who had handled 11 assignments in 9 years and who had never, in any of those 9 years, brought anything into this office other than the correct operational outcome. So Jong-soo said, You went to the archive. Yes, Rail said. You found the council files, Jong-soo said. Yes, Rail said. Then you know, Jong-soo said, what you're standing in front of me with. I know exactly what I'm standing in front of you with, Rail said. And I know what it means that I'm standing here anyway. The silence had the quality of something structural, of a load-bearing point being tested. She submits the document Monday, Rail said. Whether I am involved or not. The council has been waiting 7 weeks. The document is complete. He paused. What you do in the next 60 seconds determines whether what I know about the archive stays in this room or goes to the council alongside the document. Jong-soo looked at him for a very long time. You're threatening me, he said. I'm giving you the accurate picture, Rail said. You gave me the incomplete one. This is the correction. Rail-yoon just told the most dangerous man in his operational world that he knows about the 17 million. In Jong-soo Choi's office. Alone. Subscribe, because what Jong-soo does in the next 60 seconds is not what you're expecting. And the reason he does it is the twist that reorganizes everything that came before it. Jong-soo Choi said nothing for 44 seconds. Rail counted them. Not with a clock, with the specific, calibrated internal precision of someone for whom the measurement of silence was a professional discipline. He had learned, in 9 years of rooms with Jong-soo, to read the quality of each second of his silences the way a meteorologist reads pressure, not just the duration but the texture, the specific atmospheric quality of what was building inside the silence. This silence had a texture he had not encountered before. Not the recalculation version. Not the cold fury version. Something older. Something that was not the operational register at all, but was the thing underneath every operational register. The specific, weighted quality of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and who has, in the 44 seconds of a silence, made a decision about the carrying. At the 45th second, Jong-soo Choi said, She's not the first one they've sent. Rail was still. What? The council, Jong-soo said. In the flat, accurate register of a man who has decided to give the complete version of a truth he has been managing for 2 years. Lisa White is the third auditor they've engaged. The first 2 found nothing because I knew they were coming. Their commissioning documents were filed through channels I monitor. He paused. White Clarity Solutions was filed through a secondary channel I didn't know existed. A channel a council member created specifically to commission an auditor I would not find in time. Rail processed this. Who created the channel? Jong-soo looked at him. My brother, he said. The room reorganized itself around the sentence. Rail had known about Choi Sung-won. Everyone in the organization knew about Sung-won, in the specific, oblique way that organizations know about the people who were once inside them and are no longer. Sung-won was 6 years older than Jong-soo. He had been the organization's expected heir until 16 years ago, when the succession had gone to Jong-soo in a decision that the council had made and that Sung-won had accepted with the specific, contained quality of a man who accepted what he could not change while building the architecture of the response. Someone was on the council. He had been for 12 years. The specific, legitimate channel through which the man who had been displaced from his inheritance had maintained his organizational position. And he had spent those 12 years doing the patient, structural work of a man building a governance case against his brother with the same focused, methodical precision that Lisa White had been applying to the fund documents. He built the case from inside the council, Rail said. He built it for 12 years, Jiangsu said. He didn't know about the 17 million until 18 months ago, but he suspected embezzlement earlier than that. The first auditor was a year ago. He paused. I removed the first two. Not the way I told you to remove White. I had the documentation intercept and the auditors were relocated without the completed deliverable. He looked at Rail. White is the third. Her document is complete. The secondary layer makes it irrefutable. He paused. And someone is expecting it Monday morning. So Rail looked at Jiangsu Choi, at a man who had been running a 16-year operational defense against his own brother's patient, structural, organizational case. At a man who had used $17 million not for personal enrichment, or not only for personal enrichment, but in the specific, ongoing way of someone who had been maintaining a parallel operational infrastructure in case the governance case succeeded and he needed a position outside the organization. You were building an exit, Rail said. I've been building an exit for 4 years, Jiangsu said. The 17 million is the exit's funding. And the 3 auditors were the interference, Rail said. Yes, Jiangsu said. Rail held the complete picture. The full version, not the archive version, not the briefing version, but the version that contained Jiangsu's brother and 12 years of council governance work and 3 commissioned auditors and $17 million that was an exit fund rather than simply a theft. The version that was considerably more complicated than either the assignment or the archive had described. But being complicated was not the same as changing. The document was still complete. Sungwon Choi was still expecting it Monday morning. And Lisa White was still in an apartment on the 6th floor of a building 2 miles away, 8 weeks pregnant, waiting for the one thing that Rail had come to this office to do. The document is submitted on Monday, Rail said. I'm not going to stop it. Jiangsu looked at him for a moment. Something moved in his face, the specific, interior movement of a man who has been fighting a 16-year governance battle and who has, in this specific, particular moment, received the information that the battle is finished. No, he said. You're not. And then Jiangsu Choi did the thing that Rail had not prepared for, and that the 4 months and the archive and the 44 seconds of silence had not produced in his complete picture. He opened his desk drawer. He removed a sealed envelope. He set it on the desk between them. Take it to Sungwon, he said. Before Monday. Before the document. Rail looked at the envelope. What is it? A full accounting, Jiangsu said. The exit fund, the 17 million, the 3 auditors, everything. His own. Not the council's version, mine. He paused. Tell him I want to talk before the document is filed. Tell him I want to finish it correctly. Rail looked at the envelope. He looked at Jiangsu. Why, he said. Jiangsu looked at his desk for a moment. Then at Rail. Because you just stood in front of me with a pregnant woman and 4 sentences and didn't blink, he said. And the last time someone did something like that in this office was my brother. 12 years ago, when he told me he knew about the embezzlement and gave me the chance to correct it before he acted. He paused. I didn't take it then. He looked at the envelope. I'm taking it now. The conversation between Jiangsu and Sungwon Choi happened on a Sunday. Rail was not present. He had delivered the envelope Saturday morning to the address Sungwon maintained in Buckhead, a quiet, well-tended townhouse that communicated the specific, settled quality of someone who had not been building toward a dramatic conclusion, but toward a correct one, and who was prepared to receive whatever form the correct one arrived in. Sungwon had opened the envelope. He had read the contents with the focused, complete attention of a man who had spent 12 years building a governance case, and who was now receiving the subject of that case's own accounting of itself. He had looked at Rail over the top of the pages. He wants to talk before Monday, Rail had said. Someone had been quiet for a moment. Does he understand what the conversation will produce? He asked me to tell you he wants to finish it correctly, Rail said. Someone had held the pages for a moment. Then, Sunday evening, he said. The Koreatown restaurant. So the conversation happened on Sunday evening in the private room that had been used for Jong-soo's significant conversations for 11 years, which was the specific architectural detail that someone had chosen deliberately. Not the council chamber, not a neutral venue, but the room that belonged to the thing being concluded, as a way of concluding it in the correct space. Rail did not know what was said. He knew the outcome. The outcome arrived Monday morning in the form of a jointly submitted document from Jong-soo and Sung-won Choi to the full council. Not Lisa White's audit submission, which had been held by arrangement by West and Ardley on Sung-won's instruction, but a governance agreement that restructured the organization's principal authority into a dual oversight structure, with the $17 million documented and allocated toward a formal council reserve fund, and with the full accounting of the three auditor situations addressed through a governance remedy rather than a legal one. It was not a resolution that cleared everything. Rail understood this clearly. The governance remedy was not a clean slate, and the organization that emerged from the Monday morning filing was a different structural entity than the one that had existed the previous Thursday. But it was a resolution that was built, and this was the specific, significant quality of it, from the inside, by the two people who had been building toward its opposite for 12 years, and that had been made possible by a sealed envelope and a Sunday evening. Lisa White's document was filed Monday morning at 9 a.m. alongside the joint submission. Her audit stood as the evidentiary foundation of the governance agreement, irrefutable, complete, with the secondary layer intact. White Clarity Solutions received its engagement fee and a significant supplement that Sung-won's council faction had authorized as acknowledgement of the specific, professional quality of work that had survived 3 attempts at interference and arrived complete. But none of this was what Rail had gone back to the building on the Thursday evening to accomplish. He had gone back on the Thursday evening to be present when it mattered. He had gone back on Friday morning. After the 41st floor and the drive from the tower, and the specific, clarifying quiet of a man who has set down 15 years of one version of himself and is not yet in the next version, but is in the necessary space between, with the full truth. He sat in Lisa White's kitchen on Friday morning, and he told her everything. Not the managed version, not the briefing version, the full version, Rin and Rail and the assignment, and the archive and the 4 months that had been real regardless of the professional context they had been built inside. He told it in the flat, accurate, complete register of a man who had decided that the most important thing he was ever going to say in his life was going to be said correctly the first time. She listened, in the specific, complete, attentive way that she listened to everything, without interrupting, without the performed reactions, with the full, present, processing attention of a woman who understood that the most significant things deserved to be received in full before they were responded to. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he held the quiet with the patient, steady attention of a man who understands that the silence after a complete truth is not the absence of a response, but the presence of a person doing the correct work. So she looked at him. She looked at him with the 4 months in her face, the laundry room and the lobby and the courtyard and the dinners and the specific, accumulated real weight of 100 genuine moments. And then she said, the pregnancy was before the archive. Yes, he said. The 4 months were real, she said. Not a question. An accounting. Every moment of them, he said. She held this for another long moment. Then she said, I know your name is Rail. She paused. But you should know that I also know it's Yoon. I've known for 6 weeks. He was very still. How? Forensic accounting, she said. I found an operational name in a secondary Choi document layer I wasn't supposed to have access to. The document referenced the organization's primary enforcer by surname. She paused. I'm very good at finding money, but I'm also very good at finding everything else. She held his gaze. I knew what you were when we were still in the laundry room. I knew the risk I was taking. The kitchen was very quiet. You stayed, he said. The 4 months were real for me too, she said. And the real things are worth the risk of the complicated ones. He held this. He held the full weight of it. The complete picture, both directions, 2 people who had been carrying separate versions of the truth and had arrived, through the specific, particular path of a laundry room, and an archive, and a Thursday evening and a Friday morning, at the same picture simultaneously. I told Jiangsu, he said, about the pregnancy. I know, she said. I could tell from the quality of the Friday morning. He almost smiled. The real one. You could tell. I pay attention, she said. It's what I do. So he looked at Lisa White across the kitchen table, at the woman who had known his surname for 6 weeks and had stayed, who had been carrying the council's document through 3 attempts at interference and had delivered it irrefutably, who was 8 weeks pregnant with a child that was going to have the specific, particular quality of 2 parents who paid the full attention that everything deserved and who understood that the complete picture was the only version worth building anything on. I need to tell you what comes next, he said. Operationally, it's not simple. I work in forensic accounting, she said. Nothing I touch is simple. The organization's restructure will take months, he said. My position inside it is, he paused. It's an open question. Then we figure out the answer, she said. Together, he said. Together, she said. In the specific, flat, accurate register of a woman stating a fact that did not require emotional performance to be true. He thought about Jiangsu's desk and the sealed envelope, and a brother who had given his brother the chance to correct something 12 years ago and had built 12 years of patient governance work when the chance was not taken. He thought about the chance being taken on Sunday evening in a private room in Koreatown. He thought about the specific, structural power of the correct moment and the correct decision and the correct 4 sentences delivered to the correct person at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening on the 41st floor. He thought about Raelyun sitting in a laundry room on a second-floor bench 9 months from now, probably, teaching a child something about paying full attention. Monday, he said. Monday, she confirmed. She looked at her coffee. After the filing. After the filing, he said. And the kitchen on the 6th floor of the building in Edgewood continued its ordinary Friday morning, indifferent to the specific, particular weight of 2 people sitting at a table with the complete picture between them and the correct version of what comes next being built, in the specific, patient, structural way that the correct versions are always built, one true thing at a time, in the correct order, without the managed version, without the briefing version, with nothing except the full truth delivered at the moment it was ready and received by someone who had been ready for it longer than either of them had known. The end. From a laundry room in Edgewood to the 41st floor of the Choi Group Tower to a Sunday evening in Koreatown. Lisa White and Raelyun's story proves that the most dangerous things in any room are not the people with the assignment. They are the people who paid the full attention the whole time. Lisa White knew Rael's surname for 6 weeks and stayed. Raelyun walked into Jiangsu Choi's office with 4 sentences and an archive and didn't blink. Jiangsu Choi opened a drawer and chose the envelope over the alternative for the first time in 16 years. And Sung-won Choi waited 12 years for a Sunday evening that arrived because an enforcer stood in front of a desk and said, I can't. She's pregnant. It's mine. The document was filed Monday. The organization restructured. The baby is due in 7 months. And the Friday morning conversation was the beginning of the only thing in this story that was built entirely from scratch, without an operational file, without a briefing, without anything except the complete, accurate, full picture. Hit subscribe for next week's story. A woman hired as the estate manager for a deceased Korean patriarch discovers, on day 1 of inventory, a sealed room in the property's west wing. Inside the room is a photograph of herself at age 7. Taken 30 years before she was hired, in a city she has never visited. The photograph is dated. It is not the only one. See you there. So, real talk. When Lisa White told Rael she had known his surname for 6 weeks and stayed anyway, was that the most powerful sentence in this entire story? Yes, because Rael walked into Jiangsu's office with the courage of a man protecting someone, and then found out in Lisa's kitchen that she had been protecting herself and him simultaneously, and the 2 directions of protection were the foundation of the whole thing. No, the most powerful moment was Jiangsu opening the desk drawer and choosing the envelope. Because a man who has been fighting his brother for 16 years, choosing the correct thing over the expedient one is the sentence this story was actually building toward. See, both Lisa's knowing and staying, and Jiangsu's choosing the envelope are the same decision from two different people. The decision that the complete picture is worth more than the managed version. D. The most powerful moment was Sung-won Choi giving Jiangsu the chance to correct the embezzlement 12 years ago and waiting. Because that patience is the architecture of every resolution that followed, and without it nothing else in this story was possible. Drop your answer below and tell us, have you ever known something about someone that changed the risk calculation of being near them and stayed anyway because the 4 months were real? What does it feel like to make that specific decision? What does it cost? And what does it build? Also, Raelyun said the 4 months were real in every moment, even though the professional context was not. Is a relationship that is built inside a constructed situation still real if the people inside it were entirely genuine with each other? Where does the real live? In the context or in the people? Sound off in the comments. Because this story is about one thing underneath everything else. The specific, irreversible moment when the person with the assignment becomes the person who refuses it, and what they become instead. Not the enforcer, not the operative, the man who stood in front of the desk and said I can't, and meant it for every reason that matters. What do you think?